Okay, so I'm refuting Trey's claim that exposure to television has a significantly harmful effect on an adolescent's development. His three claims were that 1, explicit scenes on television increase early adult behavior, 2, explicit scenes on television increase violence in adolescents, and 3, television leads to the lowering of intellect in adolescents. For his first claim, explicit scenes on television increase early adult behavior, he defines adult behavior as copying the actions of adults such as drinking and having sex. My response to that is that television can inform teens about risk of sex and foster communication with parents. From the article, Does Watching Sex on Television Influence Teen Sexual Activity? By Rebecca L. Collins, she mentions how 10% more teens talk with a parent or adult about sexual intercourse after watching television. Teenage shows such as The Secret Life of the American Teenager realistically portrays teens' actions and behavior on sexual intercourse by providing scenarios such as talking to guidance counselors and parents about the risk and informs them on the right thing to do. Television can be more informative to teens rather than harmful by educating them on the risk of sexual intercourse and contraceptives. He also mentions how adolescents mature too early with the exposure of alcohol on television, but advertisements for alcohol are only shown on certain broadcast networks. In Hard Time, Liquor Advertising Pours into TV by E.J. Schultz, he reveals that networks such as NBC and ABC recently began accepting alcohol advertisements, which most adolescents don't watch those networks to begin with. Also, most broadcasting networks don't show alcohol advertisements until after 11 p.m., where 90% of the audience is of legal drinking age. Moving on to his second claim that explicit scenes on television increase violence in adolescents, he doesn't provide extensive research proving that the explicit scenes on television in fact increase violence in the adolescent. He only provides evidence showing that 2/3 of all programming contains violence and children's shows contain the most violence. In the article, research shows violent media does not cause violent behavior. It is stated that research is lacking on the direct relationship between violence in television programs and in youth violence. Also, that only 5% of adolescents are at risk of engaging in violent behavior after viewing explicit scenes on television. For his example, he mentions the Jackass effect, where they perform a stunt that they had seen in the movie, and it is more of a cause and effect from the media rather than exposure from television. The example wasn't convincing because there was only one group known to follow this effect. A lot of teens these days follow other examples because of what they had seen on social media rather than television exposure. For his last claim, it is television leads to the lowering of intellect in adolescents. My response to that is that television is beneficial to adolescents and doesn't lower the intellect. Television is proven to be more educational to adolescents than harmful. It enables teens to share cultural experience while teaching them important values, life lessons, and informing them in news, current events, and historical programming. Television also provides adolescents with critical thinking skills to be engaged viewers. Also, teens these days watch less television, which leads to less exposure. The article, The State of Traditional TV, proves that adolescents spend less time these days watching television. Between 2011 and 2016, television viewing dropped by more than 9.5 hours per week. Adolescents are more likely to spend their time with extracurricular activities, hanging out with friends, or on social media sites. Lastly, he provides evidence showing that the GSCE, which is a standardized testing in the UK, in fact, when the teens watched more TV, it lowered their test scores. So I wanted to compare it with the standardized testing done here in the States. So I found that the GCSE, which they are tested on a variety of subjects such as humanities, physics, classical subjects, and math, while the standardized testing here, it only consists of basic math, English language arts, social science, and science. So it could be that their standardized testing could be more difficult than ours. In his speech, we were told that 14-year-olds who spend an hour a day on screens during their leisure time score lower on the standardized tests, but the average amount of time a teen spends watching television is 2 hours a day, which is normal for kids their age and have no negative effect on their intellect. In conclusion, a vast majority of people believe television harms adolescents, but in reality it has a positive effect.
All right, structural stuff is fine. On the first point, you kind of discussed the definitional issues. I'm not sure that you get much from that. I did think that the evidence that you presented that suggested that teens you get 10% more discussion with their parents after they've watched particular kinds of programming. I thought that that was an effective counterclaim on the advocate's point. I don't remember any argument about the quality of their evidence on these points, but like I said, I think the counterclaim is effective. And on the alcohol issue, I'm not sure that the advocate's argument focused on advertising. Yours focuses on advertising. I would guess is that theirs is focusing on alcohol use in programming. So it may not be directly applicable, but it does attempt to diminish that claim to some degree, and I thought that that was an okay effort on that point. The violence issue, the first point that you have talks about a lack of specific evidence, and it just mentions that they've had exposure to these sorts of things without necessarily demonstrating that there is a link. That's, I think, okay. The general challenge to evidence is all right. The jackass effect, I think you mentioned, really seems like it's more related to social media than anything else. That's mostly an assertion on your part. I don't think it would be hard to find some examples, and maybe it was the example that the advocate used. I don't know. That would have been something to bring up. On the third point, you mentioned that TV does all these beneficial educational kinds of things. That's a lot of claim without a lot of evidence that goes along with it. I think that's a little bit problematic. You suggest that the number of hours that have been watched has gone down substantially. I think that's a good counterpoint. And by the way, if the number of hours has gone down, then we should see a concomitant increase in like test scores or students' abilities or fewer problems like sex and alcohol consumption. So where is that effect from the advocate? That should have demonstrated their point very effectively. And you've got a good statistic on this point that seems to run contrary to that. To me, that was the strongest argument that you had in the debate, or excuse me, in the response. The challenge about the comparability of the tests in Great Britain versus the United States, that's a press. I don't know that it gets you much, but you might as well make it. So, all right, thank you.